Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and this week we are focusing on NAFTA. And today I'm very happy to have Tyler Rauert and Manuel Aguilar here in studio with us today. Tyler is a partner with Messner Reeves, and Manuel joins us. He's a student and an intern at the World Trade Center, Denver.
That's correct.
Welcome, Manuel.
Thanks so much.
Tyler, thank you. We're so glad to have you here. I think we've got this great opportunity to kind of discuss what kind of impacts would result in the loss of the North American Free Trade Agreement. We all know it as NAFTA. Tyler, do you want to lead off? What do these renegotiations mean right now?
Sure. Well, I think there's been talk about renegotiating NAFTA for several years now, maybe even 10, 15 years. It was created, 25 years ago. The economies in all three countries have changed significantly since then. So, you might look at e-commerce and digital trade as something that didn't really exist when NAFTA was negotiated, but now is a major part of each of the three economies. So it makes sense to update NAFTA to include that. I mean, I think there are a range of other areas that could stand to be updated within NAFTA. Think of energy maybe, or labor or environmental provisions that all could be updated. So the Obama administration attempted to renegotiate NAFTA through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So if you remember, that was a trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, but also Japan, several Asian countries that sort of spans North America and the Pacific. You might remember early in the Trump administration, they withdrew from the TPP negotiations and wanted to renegotiate NAFTA on its own. So in principle, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, with renegotiating and updating NAFTA. I think you'd find agreement in all three countries. The tactics of how that's done and the results of threats to leave NAFTA, largely as a negotiating tactic, those are the things that many people find controversial and disheartening.
Yeah. So the impact, because right now, what I think over the past 25 years, we've got great relationships between Mexico and Canada, and one of the important considerations is a degree of certainty we have between trading between all the North American countries. How will that be put at risk?
Sure. Well, that's one of the forgotten benefits of NAFTA is simply the certainty of trading among the three countries.
You know what you're getting into.
You know what you're getting into. You know what your tariffs are going to be. You know what to expect from your other trading partners. In fact, NAFTA has been so successful that it just fades into the background for most people. They don't even recognize the benefits of it because it's just become such a part of our everyday life. So if, though, that were pulled away and we no longer had the trading relationship that we've had for the last several decades with Canada and with Mexico, you introduce a great degree of uncertainty into the trading environment, both in goods and in services. There are a number of supply chains that integrate all three countries where, inputs are put in one country, let's say the United States, they're shipped to Canada where they're changed, combined with something else, then sent to Mexico, combined with something else again, or changed and then sent back into the United States. Think of the auto industry, for example, right, where we may have U.S. steel going to Canada where it is made into a component of an automobile that's then shipped to Mexico where it's assembled into the final product and moved into the United States. Something along those lines. Those supply chains would be disrupted if there were changes to NAFTA. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that there really are very few solely American, Canadian, or Mexican companies anymore. There are mostly North American companies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily Canada sending an entirely new product to us. It's a partnership of creating the products that we need.
Right. Very rarely is a product created solely in one country and then shipped whole cloth into another country. It's typically parts move from country to country and they're assembled in the final destination country and then sold there. So any given product will have components from all three countries, and say a product that looks like it's imported from Mexico actually has a great deal of American content when it's sold back into the United States.
Okay, so what are your concerns, or what? Maybe let me ask it this way: if you could bend our president's ear and say, here's what I think should happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
If I had 5 minutes with the president, I think I would say, listen, renegotiating, updating, modernizing NAFTA is a great idea. All three countries want to do that. We've got the areas that I'd mentioned before where I think we could probably focus. Those are the areas that makes a lot of sense. Threatening to withdraw, however, injects a great deal of uncertainty into the business environment in those three countries. I mean, I represent a lot of companies that are foreign, that are investing in the United States. They are very cautious and they're holding back on investments here because they're nervous about what will happen with NAFTA. They just can't predict what it will look like. Now, the president might not understand that I too am an exporter, that my law firm exports legal services to foreign countries. All my clients I'm exporting to. So my business is harmed by the lack of certainty that manufacturers and energy producers and farmers may feel because of the NAFTA renegotiations. So the simple fact of the uncertainty that's created now is harmful to the economy writ large. So I'd ask him to take a look at that, maybe think about how those negotiating tactics might impact people in a very real way as they exist in the economy today.
So we're kind of seeing it right now as, if we had to put a read on it, it seems like Trump is saying, hey, no, we want to be able to export everything we want. We're going to trade with you, except the with. We want you to buy all of our stuff, but we're going to put tariffs and restrictions on what we're bringing in to the United States.
Right. It almost looks like, I mean, the Olympics just ended. So, we think about national teams and that our team, because we have a trading goods deficit with Mexico, is somehow losing to Mexico.
Right.
Well, that's not how trade deficits and surpluses work. That it's not one country exporting to or importing from another country. That's how the statistics work out, but it's not what happens. It's one business.
Because we all need those goods and services to be able to do our
business. Exactly. So it's one company importing from maybe a company in another country or exporting to another country. And in theory, when a transaction like that occurs, both parties feel like they've gotten the benefit of the bargain, that both parties have won. And so a trade deficit, and ask most economists, they will say that a trade deficit isn't the thing that should drive trade policy. And in fact, it's very difficult to change trade deficits with trade policy. That really what you should be focusing on is the relative benefit to the individuals and to the consumers in particular, and how much more buying power do consumers have in each country. That's really where the power of international trade comes in. It's enhanced efficiency, it's greater allocation of capital, or more enhanced, more efficient allocation of capital. That's all to the good. And viewing it as a competition between countries actually sets us back, and it's the wrong lens through which to view international commerce.
Thank you. That's a really great description, I think. And Tyler, let's bring Manuel into the conversation here. Manuel is a student at DU?
That's no, at CU Denver.
At CU Denver, I'm sorry. Manuel's a student at CU Denver.
That's correct, yeah.
And an intern at the World Trade Center, Denver. So Tyler, what perspective were you hoping Manuel could share with us?
Well, I was hoping Manuel could just share with us a little bit about his background, what interests him in NAFTA, and what his career goals are looking forward, and how the renegotiation of NAFTA might shape his career moving forward.
Well, I guess I've always grown up with NAFTA. I guess it's been around since I was born. And as a student, I kind of like prices low. So I want NAFTA to stay just so I don't have to, spend more of my income in food and clothes and other stuff. I want to not worry about that. I just want cheap prices, and I think NAFTA, if it goes away, is just going to raise prices, and it's not going to be good for students or anyone really.
What about obviously, if you're an intern at World Trade Center Denver, you definitely have an interest in trade, and whether it's international trade or within our continent. What do you fear changing from what you've maybe seen growing up?
Maybe lack of variety. So I'm an international business student, and I'm also taking classes at the World Trade Center for international business. And a lot of these people are importing and exporting, and it seems like that's what everyone's doing. You know, business is not just here in the United States, it's definitely global. If you just want to do business here, it's going to be pretty boring. You know,
I mean, that's a great point, because
Yeah.
we have everything now. You know, because I'm looking back, Manuel, when I was your age, you know, you could only get what was at the store. We didn't even have, you know, we didn't have the internet to go find more, better, more interesting things. So you make a great point that we have access to everything we'd like to get our hands on.
Yeah, and maybe I'm comparing it to something a little bit more drastic. I went to Cuba last January, and I checked out some of their stores, and they don't have a lot of product. They only really have what they trade with some countries and what they produce there. And I feel like I mean, maybe this is like a little too much, but if NAFTA goes away and we're not trading with anybody, we're just going to be stuck with corn and potatoes, maybe. Like.
Right. No more avocados. Is that the fear?
Exactly.
Yeah, breakfast is going to be real boring.
Well, that's what Alex, who helps produce the show, came up with this. NAFTA stands for No Avocados for the Americans.
I love that. That's fantastic.
To really put it into what matters, right, Tyler?
That's right. That's right.
So, Tyler, from what you're hearing from Manuel, how do you address that?
Well, yeah. So I do think there's, you know, Manuel has never known anything but NAFTA. So he's only known a grocery store with avocados in it and tomatoes all year round and, you know, those sorts of things. So many people may not understand what they could potentially be missing, or even if those products are still in the store, and I expect they probably would be, they would be maybe more expensive, right? So what does that mean for a consumer? What does it do to
avocados aren't expensive enough.
Right.
You have to pay extra for them.
Right.
For your guacamole.
Right. Even more extra for guac. Yeah.
Extra.
Right. So I think that's one of those things where Manuel has identified some spaces where maybe some of his peers aren't even thinking about it, right? The variety in the grocery store is going to be different and probably more expensive. The clothes that they can buy are going to be different and maybe more expensive. You know, if the steel and aluminum tariffs go through, that can of beer that I know when I was in college I loved and still do, to be quite honest, is going to be a bit more expensive.
And not for the content of the beer.
Not for the content of the beer, just for the can itself, right? So that's you know, something that young people, I think, need to be thinking about, just in terms of their role as a consumer, but also their role as professionals moving forward. The economy, the global economy, is truly a global economy. It is integrated at all points. And walking that back, while it sounds good to some politically, makes Manuel's future much less bright than it otherwise could be. It takes away opportunities from him and from his peers to do interesting, groundbreaking, innovative things, because they're not exposed to people and products and ideas from other parts of the world.
Thank you. And we talk about that very often on this show, of just what we're able to accomplish by being able to trade or export with other countries. You have businesses here that maybe have a great product and they can do well locally. And Tyler, I think that's part of your job, is to help to get them on the global scale.
To expand their market.
Expand that market.
Right, exactly. I mean, and many businesses do much better at scale. They need global markets in order to make their product profitable.
It's cheaper to produce more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're looking for economies of scale, which means we need export markets. And for a lot of companies, their components are imported from other countries as well. So if they can import cheaper products from overseas that they can then fashion into whatever it is that they're making and then export it, well, that improves the quality of that business on both sides, makes more jobs. Let's say it's a renewable energy company here in Colorado. They may import components from, I've got several clients who do exactly this. They import components from Europe into the United States, combine them with products that are imported from Mexico and Canada into components for our growing renewable energy industry here, and then they sell it on to the final producer of, let's say, wind blades or solar panel manufacturers. Well,
all of that very necessary if we're trying to integrate our energy profile.
Absolutely. And it all creates jobs in Colorado. So you've got imported components into Colorado that are then assembled here and sold on. Those are Colorado jobs that benefit both from importing and from exporting.
Tyler, let's go back to your love of beer.
Yes.
We were talking about what the expense of beer might be, and it's not necessarily the content of the beer is going to change, but those cans of beer.
Right.
And are they still made out of aluminum?
Yes.
Is there something else? But when we're talking about that metal, so it can be produced here in the U.S., but it typically goes across a border to be shaped, formed, forged. I don't know.
Sure. So I think we're sort of referring to the recent steel and aluminum tariffs that the Trump administration has put in place. So these were put in place on national security grounds, which is unusual. Typically, if you're going to impose tariffs like this, it would be based on a country unfairly subsidizing an industry in their country. Think of China and steel, right? The Chinese government does indeed subsidize Chinese manufacture of steel that is then, they have an overcapacity in China. They can't sell it all in China. So they sell it all or they sell what is left over on the global market.
Okay.
And they sell it at very cheap prices because they're just trying to get rid of it as part of the issue. But also, if they can sell this steel more cheaply than, say, a domestic producer in the United States or in Canada or in Europe, they might be able to take market share over time from those folks, drive them out of business, and then when they raise prices later, they've got a larger market share. That's called dumping. Okay. So it's dumping products into another country. Typically, the United States, and they've done this to Chinese steel regularly over the last 10 or 15 years, they will impose what are called countervailing duties. So they'll impose taxes. They say, China, if you subsidize your steel industry by $2 billion, we will put $2 billion worth of tariffs on the steel that you import into the United States. That's typically how the process works.
Okay.
The recent steel and aluminum tariffs were not based on foreign subsidies of these products, but rather based on national security concern. The idea being that if the U.S. isn't producing enough steel and aluminum domestically, that it harms our ability to produce weapons of war in time of war when we might need it. I spent a decade working in national security, so I have some arguments against the administration's arguments here, but putting that aside, even if we say there's a national security concern on steel and aluminum, our biggest steel importers, for instance, are Canada, Mexico, South Korea, Turkey, Japan, all allies.
Okay.
We don't see a national security risk there. So the Trump administration has very clearly made the exemptions from these tariffs for Canada and Mexico contingent on their renegotiating a NAFTA agreement that is satisfactory to our administration. So they're using national security concerns to try to strong arm, frankly, Mexico and Canada into agreeing to what President Trump wants on the NAFTA renegotiations. I think that's short-sighted. It's difficult to say that there is a national security risk from Canada,
right,
for example, or from Mexico. That's just not the case. So in the end, while these tariffs are in place, that can of beer that I like so much is going to cost more because Ball Canning has to pay more for their inputs to can the beer.
Right.
Well, that means I'm paying more for beer in the United States to subsidize quote-unquote national security for the U.S. It is a tax on us, the consumer.
I mean, you put it that way.
Right. So it's beer in the name of national security. Right.
Gonna have to switch to wine.
That's great.
Which I'm fine with, personally. But my husband likes the beer. So, we got to be able to manage it all, right?
That's right.
So we were speaking a little bit before we started the show today with the steel tariffs. I'm looking at, maybe I'll let you look at that too, the release from Nucor Steel. I know they've got facilities in Norfolk, Nebraska is the one I'm thinking of.
Sure.
They may have more locations. But so they approve of the tariffs. Can you explain why? Because we just explained why we need to be able to move the steel between all of our countries.
Sure. Look, if I were an American steel producer and the government were going to eliminate my competition, I would be happy too. It means I can raise my prices. It means I'm protected from competition, which is the point of protectionism. And that's something that I think people need to think about, is who benefits from protectionism and protecting our segments of our economy from foreign competition.
It's kind of insulating it.
Right, definitely insulating. It's not necessarily the workers. The steel producers may hire more workers in Norfolk, and I hope they do. But I'm skeptical, especially with automation of the steel industry as well as others, that the owners of those companies will benefit, and that's good for them. I'm not sure that it actually helps the laborers and the folks who actually make the steel as much as they would like to think it does. But look, if I own a steel company in Norfolk, I would be happy about this, right? Or Pittsburgh or anywhere else in the United States, because my competition is eliminated. That doesn't mean that it helps other Americans. So if I were, let's say, an automobile producer, I would be upset by this because steel is one of my inputs, right? So if I'm making cars, I'm paying more for steel because it has to come from the United States. Well, that means that my cars are now more expensive, and I have to lay off some people in my manufacturing facility. So, and I'm probably selling fewer cars because my cars cost more.
Great. Thank you, Tyler. That's such a great explanation of how it might benefit one side, but it's definitely going to have impacts throughout the economy.
Oh, absolutely.
So I want to touch back, Tyler. I'm speaking with Tyler Rauert, partner with Messner Reeves. I'm sorry. I have family friends named Messner, so I keep slipping that direction.
No worries.
So talk about why the renegotiation of NAFTA is really critical when we talk about advancements in technology. You mentioned earlier this segment about these technological advancements that weren't in place when NAFTA was created.
Sure.
And what the difference is now.
Okay, so I think there are a few ways that we can look at how the renegotiation of NAFTA is important when we look through a technology lens. One is the intellectual property associated with the components of manufacturing, right? So you may have a patent on a process or a product that you want to make. If you want to manufacture that product, perhaps a facility in Mexico is your best option to manufacture that product. But you want to be sure that you can protect your intellectual property so that somebody doesn't steal your patent in Mexico and then start importing into the United States. So you have to secure those patents there, and Mexico has to play the United States as far as protecting intellectual property. Same with Canada, same with any country anywhere in the world. So that's one area where NAFTA can be improved and updated, is intellectual property protection to allow for that scenario. Another is digital trade or e-commerce, right? So we think of buying things online.
Right.
NAFTA doesn't particularly contemplate this sort of new economy feature. So updating NAFTA to take account of how the modern economy works, that things are bought and sold on Amazon more than they are at storefronts, at least for some products. That's going to matter a great deal in the renegotiation of NAFTA. And that there can be some really good positive steps in those areas.
Wonderful. So thank you, Tyler Rauert, for these great explanations. As we're just wrapping up this segment, I guess put a final point on it for us. And
Sure. I think the thing to remember about NAFTA is that it has been such a part of the North American economy for so long that people forget it exists. They forget why it's important. But it's one of those things that makes North America strong as a region, that we are, I think, the world's largest trading bloc, Canada, the United States, and Mexico combined. And to the extent that we stay together, we are stronger together because we have these integrated supply chains, and we can work together with our friends and neighbors. If we start having disagreements with our neighbors about trade, it makes each of us weaker in comparison to the rest of the world. So without NAFTA, the United States alone is weaker vis-a-vis China and vis-a-vis the European Union and others.
Okay, thank you so much. Great explanation, Tyler Rauert, partner with Messner Reeves. And thank you also to Manuel Aguilar, a student at CU Denver and an intern with World Trade Center Denver. Stick with us. We're going to have more on NAFTA when we come back from this break.